Global warming, the looming on the horizon, or already a fact of life. As Channel 4 News reported last night, the Inuit people in northern Canada claim America's massive consumption of fossil fuels is already devastating their temperatures, destroying their Arctic habitat. But now, two key environmentalists are disputing the evidence about global warming. One claims the glaciers are actually growing, that the ice cap is thickening. The other says he's just trying to deny climate change exists. More evidence today, claim those worried about climate change, as an alpine glacier gets the kid glove treatment. Alarmed by the retreat of its ice cap, a Swiss ski resort is taking the extraordinary measure of swathing its glacier in a fleece-like material to reflect the sun's rays and slow down its melting. But now, two high-profile environmentalists are locking horns over whether or not glaciers are rapidly diminishing anyway. Writing in The New Scientist a month ago, the world-famous ecologist David Bellamy said,
"It should be pointed out that glaciers in many other parts of the world are not shrinking, but in fact are growing. Indeed, if you take all the evidence that's rarely mentioned by the Kyotoists into consideration, 555 of all the 625 glaciers under observation have been growing since 1980.
Today, the environmental campaigner and journalist George Monbiot responded.
I telephoned the World Glacier Monitoring Service and read out Bellamy's letter. I don't think the response would have been published in Nature, but it had the scientific virtue of clarity. This is complete bullshit. The latest studies show unequivocally that most of the world's glaciers are retreating.
Mr. Monbiot is concerned David Bellamy's high profile means organisations unwilling to accept greenhouse gases as a cause of global warming will use his position to defend their practices. And as we reported last night, the Inuit people of northern Canada firmly believe the increase in temperatures and subsequent destruction of their environment can be blamed on Western neighbours. So who's got it right? Well, tonight, for the first time, we can bring David Bellamy and George Monbiot together to get to the bottom of all this. They've never actually met before, but they have indeed been in dialogue on the internet. David Bellamy, the World Glacier Monitoring Service, you heard it, bullshit.
Bullshit. Well, I have just read George's wonderful article in the paper, and I would like to go and check it, because if you actually read what the monitoring say said, some glaciers have been going, and they castigated me for not knowing why and wherefore.
But let's get to the central thing. Do you believe the ice cap is thickening and that the glaciers are, in fact, if anything, getting stronger and more iced?
I think there is good evidence from around the world that this is actually happening.
George Monbiot.
It's just staggering. The latest figures by the World Glacier Monitoring Service show that of the 88 glaciers they're monitoring, 82 are in retreat, 94% in other words. The other ones are in stasis. There are one or two glaciers around the world among thousands which are growing, and it's because of local effects of global warming caused by higher rainfall in those places. But worldwide, it's a picture of massive retreat, and all the scientific evidence shows this. When I tried to find out where David obtained this evidence, he pointed me to a website run by a convicted fraudster, a man who's received a 15-year sentence for fraud. I then followed these figures back and back and back and back, until eventually, having gone through endless dodgy websites, I found one which said that they came from a paper published in Science 16 years ago, 1989. I checked that up. I went through every edition of Science published in 1989. There is no such paper. There were no such figures. These are fraudulent figures, and I'm afraid, David, you've found yourself committing scientific fraud.
Oh, really? Well, tell me, what is your... I believe in climate change, and I believe it's a completely natural process. Now, you believe in carbon-forced climate change. Tell me where the evidence is.
Well, there is a staggering amount of evidence, literally tens of thousands of scientific papers. Your attempt to produce some counter-evidence actually relied on false data, on what appears to be fabricated data, what appears to be fraudulent data. So, I have to say, David, if you are dismissing the great majority, and I'm talking over 99% of the world's climate scientists, and what they are saying about climate change, you have to have some pretty strong data in order to dismiss that. But what you have dismissed it with is data which has no source and which appears to be completely false. You'll have to do a lot better than that.
George, you have been having a go at me for a long, long time. tell me where the evidence is for carbon-induced global warming. It is a series of models. You can't prove anything with a model. Look at the measurements. Tell me where the measurements are.
I have here a statement from the British Royal Society plus 16 other equivalent societies around the world. Despite increasing consensus on the science underpinning predictions of global climate change, doubts have been expressed recently, I think they were talking about you, about the need to mitigate the risks posed by global climate change. We do not consider such doubts justified. And the reason they do not consider such doubts justified is that every time you open science, every time you open Nature, every time you open any specialist, peer-reviewed journal on climatology, on atmospheric physics, on glaciology, on any of the subjects which show us that climate change is taking place, in every single journal you will find endless papers demonstrating this fact. And they're not based on computer models, they are based on hard empirical evidence.
Measurements. Show me where those measurements are that carbon is inducing global warming.
David,
but there aren't any.
You have to be.
You take any measurements up in the balloons, they are not
There
going
are
up.
hundreds. There are satellite measurements, there are weather balloon measurements, there are scores and scores of them. I swear to you, you have to be willfully
Can I just
blind not to
come in
see
here
this.
for a moment, because you both agree there is global warming, but you think it's entirely natural. There's got nothing to do with the combustion engine. And you say it is entirely due to the combustion engine.
And I say so on the basis of the work of 99-point-something% of the world's climate scientists.
I'm not one of the climate scientists. I am a scientist who has taught climate change at university for a long, long time. And if we'd have been sitting here 10,000 years ago, we'd have been on the edge of a large ice sheet. The Romans were growing grapes in York. We then had a little ice age, which lasted into 1840.
As a scientist,
no, it's not completely irrelevant, because if you look at
George
the
Monbiot,
hockey stick model...
The idea that we have been through ice ages before, we've been through hot times and the rest of it, what is to say that we're not simply going through another cycle?
Well, we are going through a new cycle of climate change, but in this case it's caused by enhanced greenhouse effect, caused by emissions of carbon dioxide and other gases. And the scientific consensus that that is the case is as strong as the consensus that smoking causes lung cancer, as strong as the consensus that HIV causes AIDS. To deny it, you have literally to ignore a mountain range of evidence and pick up instead a tiny crumb of data which then disintegrates in your hand because it turns out to be false. And to do that while calling yourself a scientist suggests to me that actually, David, you are going way beyond the region here of fair comment, and you are quite deliberately using false data and treading into the region of scientific fraud.
David Bellamy, what would change your mind?
Some real data about rises in temperature. You've got a 0.6 degree... 0.6 degrees centigrade rise in temperature. My paper, or my article to the New Scientist, actually said, hooray, it's working. 0.6 degree rise is evaporating billions of tons of water. And when that water falls on the tops of glaciers and things, they are growing.
But they're not. They're not growing. There is no evidence that they are growing. The only evidence you could come up with falsified data.
Well, then I will go back. You have spent 3 weeks, you tell me, going through all this data. I don't have access to those.
Well,
I will. Now,
shouldn't you have gone through it before you published it?
Shouldn't I have gone through that data?
Shouldn't
I went to a whole series of websites and.
You went to a website published by a convicted fraudster, and that's where you got your material from. Should you not have checked your sources?
Thank you very much for telling me that, George.
But shouldn't you have known that before you published?
If you go to the website, there's lots and lots and lots of data out there flying about, and you're lucky you sit there and you are paid to write articles in the thing to say, to find all this data out. I am not.
I'm wondering whether perhaps it might be a good idea to make another date and come back and resume the conversation.
I'd be delighted.
What should we say? Well, 6 months' time?
I would love George to actually persuade me, because it would make my life a lot easier. And then I could actually join him and fight against wind farms, because he actually said in in the New Scientist that they are...
I think we're wandering out into another...
No, we are not.
He
actually said that they are useless and they will not stop
Well, I'll tell you what we'll do.
So
We'll try to pick up on the traffic between you on our website. We'll run a link and see what happens. And if you're good enough, we'll have you back again at a later stage and see whether we can get any further.
Thank you.
I'm very grateful to you, David Bellamy, and to George Monbiot for coming in. You're watching Channel 4 News, 7:30, our main headlines tonight.